Hi, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh, and today is a special day. Today we're going to be doing the build video of the FT Cruiser. Now, if you haven't seen the review of the FT Cruiser, it is a very versatile, fun ship. Not only is it the 9th plane in the swappable series, but it's our first twin engine. And with that twin engine, we have great versatility and also a couple of really unique flying abilities, such as differential thrust. It just does incredible things. So, if you want to build the FT Cruiser, you can go ahead and go to our website and download the plans for free. Before you go ahead and start building, make sure you build 2 power pods. Now, we have a link below showing you how to build your power pods. The only difference on this one is you don't need to worry about the landing gear or popping your lead through the bottom. It's all going to be done through the wing. So go ahead and go get your plans downloaded, or you can go to our store and simply get your speed build kit purchased and delivered right to your door, and you're ready to go. Get your tools in order and we'll get started. Now, an added bonus for you guys: if you get the speed build kit, it'll keep your wives and family members happy. Don't get rid of your bag. Simply just take a little piece of tape, tape it to the edge of your workbench, and now you can catch all that evil foam that you're not going to need. Now, the FT Cruiser builds very similar to the Foul Flyer, the FT 3D, and also the Baby Blender. So if you built any of those before, this is going to be very comfortable for you to build. And we're going to, like all those other builds, start with our wings first, just because the wings are the most intimidating, but also the most gratifying. Our first step is going to be like on our other wings, is we're going to cut a double bevel on the leading edge of our wing, and then also another bevel on the ailerons. Do this to both wings. Now, if you don't like doing this with a razor blade, you can also use sandpaper on a plywood backing. There we go. Just to recap, we have a double bevel where our leading edge is, a single bevel where our ailerons are. Once again, on the plans, these will be 2 blue lines. You just simply go ahead and put a light crease to the straight edge using your fingernail or popsicle stick. With the outer skin of your wing facing up, go ahead and join the 2 wing halves together. Make sure that you line up the trailing edge and the leading edge as perfectly as possible. Split it right down the middle on your tape. Go right over the portion of the wing and seal that half down. Now you can lift up your tape and slide it right into the other half of your wing. Make your adjustments. Once you're happy, simply push the tape forward. You're good to go. Now that we have this, we're going to bend our wing to about a 45-degree bevel. And this is the exact same process as the Foul Flyer. Put a simple bead of glue right down the center, just for the added rigidity. The tape does most of the work. Go ahead and lay this on a perfectly flat building board. It's very important that you have this nice and flat. You can easily take some of your scrap foam and smear these 2 together. Now that the wing halves are dry, simply take that remainder of the tape that you had, fold it over, and press it down. Do this on both the leading and the trailing edge. Once you're happy with that, take an additional piece of tape and finish off the center seam. This is where all your strength is going to come. Simply set it right down, splitting the difference right down the center line. Now, while we're here, we're going to take our number 11 X-Acto knife and we're simply going to crease this right over where the folds are. It's very important to do this because when we're going to deflect the wing up to get the trailing edge down, we don't want this tape holding off in those 2 areas. Now, on the scratch build and also the other plane, just take your fingernail and ride along the edge of where those crease lines are done. Now, with the laser cut speed build kits, your fingernail kind of fits right in that edge. But if you're doing it with a scratch build, go ahead and take a straight edge to help you along with this process. With the bottom portion of our wing trailing edge facing towards us, we're going to take these long, skinny, slender spacers that are included in your kit and also on the plans, and we're going to take this reference line here. Now, reference lines are going to be marked in green on your plans, or just laser etched right in the foam board on your speed build kits. So we're going to want to take the spacer block and we're going to line up the back edge of your spacer block with a etched line right here. Simply take some glue and glue it on. Get this as close as possible And be very careful when you're transferring measurements and reference lines from your plans, because doing this a little bit off is going to be what depicts where your trailing edge of your wing finally rests. And we want this to be a flat bottom airfoil, and we want the edge of the wing to lay flat up against the table. Repeat the same step on the other side of your wing. Now that these are dry, we're going to go to our spars. Now once again on the plan, everything written in red is your 50% score cut. A 50% score cut is where the razor only goes 50% through the material and leaves the paper on the other side. So just take time when you're reading your plans and transferring everything to make sure that you obey the colors. Black is cut through, red is score cut, green is transfer mark. Another thing to keep in mind with building a plane this size is make sure you have a hot glue gun that can deliver enough hot glue. We use the bigger sticks and the higher temperature hot glue, and whenever you're gluing these long spars in or running the bead of glue from tip to tip, you don't want your glue getting cold and having to wait to get the rest of the parts glued. With both your spars folded together and glued, they'll only go in one way. If you have it in the wrong direction, you're going to notice that the spar is going to stick off the trailing edge. Turn it so the spar lines up perfectly with the center line and ends right at the tip. Simply take a nice hot bead of glue and glue this down. Once again, this is a good time to make sure you have a hot glue gun that can deliver enough hot glue at one time. Simply press that down and let it dry. It's always important to have a nice flat building board too, because if you have a nice flat building board, everything goes together much truer. If you're working over a bent surface, oftentimes when you glue things down, it's with a tilt in it. This should look very familiar to the Baby Blender, the Foul Flyer, the FT3D. It's all the same process with exception with the spacer block in the back. Now would be a good time, hopefully if you have some big hands, you can start go ahead and creasing your wing up, just like we did on the other builds. And don't try to do this in one fluid motion. Let the paper and the wing find its shape. Just like that. Rocking motions is really good. It gives that leading edge time to stretch out. If you force it, oftentimes what will happen is before this leading edge relaxes, you'll put a nice wrinkle in the back. And keep your pressure spread over the whole entire wing. Now, focus a lot of your attention on this one area right here in the wing. You'll see that's going to be the flat portion that's going to be parallel with your lower part of your wing. And you want to start pushing that so you can feel it meeting the very bottom where the wing meets the top of the spar. Just like that. Once we're happy with this, this is a good time to make sure that your hot glue gun is fully loaded, because we're going to put down a lot of hot glue at one time. Once we put this glue down, we're not going to fold the top surface of the wing down onto the bottom surface. We're going to go the backwards way. We're going to go ahead and put the bottom surface and fold it over and then press this down. Now keep in mind, if you have any kind of dents, any kind of balls of glue on your building table, it's going to dent your wing. So make sure this area is nice and clean for you. So when we put our glue down, leading edge, spar, and if we wish, a little bead right over this crease area, fold the back edge over and then press down right on the spars. We're not going to worry about the trailing edge at this moment, and hold this for a good long time until it's thoroughly dried. I hate it when glue guns do that. There we go. Say your hands aren't that big, you can also use a straight edge, or you can even lay your arm down like this. Just make sure you spread the load over as far as you can over the whole entire spar. This is roughly a 50+ inch wingspan, so it's a very big wing. With the speed build kit, this is laser etched, so you can see it actually hinges open like this. Not a big deal if you're doing the scratch build version, you don't have the gap. The only difference is when you're doing the scratch build, you're going to go ahead and put your glue in this area and then press this down. If you have the speed build, because the hinge line is open, like the 50% score cut, we can actually open this up like a door. Put our bead of glue down here and along the spacer bar, and then lay it down flat. Now this is the reason why I said it's very important for the spacer bar to be in the right spot. This is what gives us the ability to push against here really hard and just touch the very back edge, giving it a nice flat airfoil. If this was too far forward, this area would be lifted up and it wouldn't touch the back of your nacelles, which would really just make it look funny. Wouldn't really do much in the flying characteristics. The earlier models I built had it, flew just fine. We'll go ahead and just put a bead of glue along this back edge. Once again, if you're scratch building, you don't need to worry about this at all. And then a bead of glue on the spacer bar. This is a much easier wing to build, I think, than even the baby blender. Now we're just going to take nice even pressure right along that back spacer bar. Don't worry too much about this area right here. That glue will hold it down. And then hold it until it's thoroughly dry. Friends, our wing is now done. The next step is to put this aside someplace safe. We're going to start on our fuselage. Now our fuselage build's almost identical to the FT3D and also the baby blender. Very similar. So the first thing we're going to want to do, whether it's a speedboat kit or the scratch build, is remove all the excess foam, just like we were building our power pods. Now that we have all the flashing removed so we can fold our fuselage together, our next step is going to be very different from our previous builds. We're going to install our rudder and our elevator servo before we even put the fuselage together. That's to save us from trying to get our servos through a little access hole in the rear of the tail. So before you do that, it's a good idea to always take off the sticker, use a blade, and scratch it up. 50 grit sandpaper works really good too. I also centered this up and put my linkage stopper all the way out the very, very tip to give me the proper throw. Turn it 90 degrees, and then just center up your servo arm inside that slot. Make sure you're happy with where everything sits on the outside. Alright, we'll repeat the process on the other side. Now as you can see, I'm taking the extension, I'm using long corded servos here, and I'm taking the extension, I'm moving them towards the wing cutout. Very important to do that, because you don't want to waste servos. You still need to use a little extension unless you have not long enough leads to get there. And also, if you do need to use extensions and you have short leads, put your extensions on now so you don't have to try to get back to your leads later. One thing I also like to do, since it's so hard to get to these leads, is put a little drop of glue, stretch this out, and glue these leads down. That way they're not flopping around and you don't have to try to snake for them later. Our next step is to take a straight edge right along these reference lines that were laser etched or also on your Planger blue lines, and we're simply going to lift up the fuselage just like we do on the baby blender and the FT3D to give that taper in the rear part of your fuselage. All this is doing is telling the foam where to bend. This is a B-style fold, and a B-style fold pertains to the orientation of the side cheeks on the top or the bottom plate. So in this case, you're going to want to match your fold exactly like you see this. Here's your bottom plate. The side cheeks are going to go next to the bottom plate. So now that we have that orientation worked out, we're going to take our hot glue, put a bead of glue all the way to the tail. Now this is where you got to be very careful to do this right. I'm going to fold this up, push down flat against the building board, making sure I'm 90 degrees. And then before this dries, I'm simply going to fold this back and meet the rear of the tail up with the very bottom. You can also rock this back too, but keep in mind not to let this front area sag down. You want nice, crisp, hard edges that are 90 degrees and very true. Take your time on this process, make sure you get it down very smooth. You don't need to rush it, it goes together very quickly. Repeat the exact same process on the other side now. Once again, a B-style fold, the side cheeks going next to the bottom plate. Fold it up. I'm going to put my attention to the back here, making sure that's nice and glued together. The reason this is so important is if you do this wrong now, your wings are going to be crooked and your tail is as well. So practice this move a couple times before you go ahead and put the hot glue down. And just like the FT3D, we're going to put a bead of glue on the very top plate on both sides. Keep in mind the glue is incredibly hot. I burn my hands every time I do this. Simply fold this over. And I like to actually move this down. You can even take a scrap piece of foam if you want. If you don't want to burn your hand. push that down and make sure it's seated together. Just like that. You'll find through this build process just the right amount of glue. You want enough to go ahead and squeeze through and fully coat the area, but any excess glue that squirts out is just excess weight. It doesn't do anything for you strength-wise. Our next step is to cut bevels just like we do on previous planes in the elevator and also our rudder. About a 35-45 degree angle is all you need. This plane is not a 3D airplane, so you don't need a tremendous amount of throw. You're actually going to have about the same throws as our FT Flyer, which is only about 19 degrees, and that's going to be more than enough to fly the plane very well. Repeat the same process on our rudder. There we go. Now, just like our FT3D, we have this notch here. We're going to fold this back. We're going to slide the point through our reference line with the paper on the top side. You don't want the bevel. If you flip this around like this, your control horn is going to be on the wrong side, so make sure your paper's facing up. Simply slide this over, down through the hole, and come back around and join these back together like this. Now, you keep this floppy. We're going to go ahead and take our fuselage, and we're going to put our attention into the elevator. Once we slide this through, we're then going to work on the rudder to get it to go through. This is where the portion comes that's hard for people to believe. We're going to leave this elevator alone until we have our wing down. The only thing we're going to glue down straight and true is going to be our rudder, and we're going to do that right now. A very, very thin bead of glue. We're going to have some doublers going in this area, so you don't want to put an excessive amount of glue or the doublers are going to ride out on it. It's also a good time to take a little scrap piece of foam that you have laying around and smooth that out. Now go ahead and put your attention into getting as square as possible. Our next process will be to take these two doublers here and knock them out. You can see that there's a 90-degree angle on both of these. Where the 90-degree angle is, this is going to be your bottom surface, this is going to be the surface that goes parallel with the front of your rudder. If you put this upside down, you're going to see it's not going to fit nearly as well. It'll still work, it'll just be a little sloppy. So with this done now, we're going to go ahead and apply our glue and mount our doublers right up against our rudder. Also wouldn't hurt to put another bead of glue right down against here again so the bottom seats in. This gives the rudder a tremendous amount of strength. Now that our doublers are on, we'll go ahead and take off our little turtle deck formers. There's only two of them. This is very similar to the baby blender. Little dab of glue on the back here as well. Sit the small one down in place. Doesn't have to be perfectly 90 degrees, but it's nice to keep everything true. If you really worry about angles and fits on the small pieces, everything will come together. But if you let everything get a little sloppy from the beginning, you're going to have some real alignment issues when everything builds off of it. So take your time and do it right. And one more former to go. This former will be seen, so take your time to make sure it's nice and clean and tight. Now that our rudder and our doublers are firmly on, and also our formers, we're going to go ahead, before we slide the wing into the airframe, we're going to go ahead and put our turtle deck on. Now this is almost identical process to the baby blender and a lot of the other planes that we built as well. But first we're going to want to test fit it. Now the speed build kit comes with one of these laser cut, but the attention area, everything has a reference mark. The area I want you to put your attention to on this one, on the speed build kit and also on your pattern, is the very back. The back is going to line up with the back of your doublers. So make sure that lines up perfectly and that there's enough space to go down. Now you don't want to try to glue the sides down and then have everything mesh up on the very top. What we're going to do instead is we're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue right on top of these doublers, kind of pushing up against the rudder ever so slightly. I'm not going to put any glue on these two formers here, because what will happen is it'll make a little flat mark and kind of look funny. We're going to take our poster board. Now the laser cut, there's a little kind of a yellow line here from where the laser goes through. I just like to turn that down so it goes against the airframe. Doesn't make a big difference because tape covers it up later. But lay this right over, paying attention to your reference lines, and let that poster board stay nice and true, sticking right out. And then work that glue up right through that seam of that poster board so it kind of seals that edge. You can always go back if you don't do this right the first time and reinforce it. And then leave it alone. Let it dry thoroughly. Give it a good 30-40 seconds. And if you go back and you start working this around and it starts lifting up, put a bead of glue on both sides of the turtle deck and the rudder. Now this is dried thoroughly, now's the time to test it. You can always go back and put a bead of glue here. The only time it's too late is when you have your sides down. But we're going to go ahead and start working this over. Now there is a grain to your poster board. You want to go to the way it bends the easiest. If you go to the way it bends the hardest, oftentimes your poster board will wrinkle. This looks really good. I don't have to put any additional glue. But if you do, don't worry, just do it before you bend this portion down. Now just like in the baby blender, we're going to go ahead and make a tape hinge. And I like to use good quality Scotch tape. You can also get the matte finish so it doesn't act reflective, since everything on this plane is very matte and flat. Simply take it, split the difference right down the middle, half on, half off. We're going to put a very thin bead of glue on the very bottom. Now, with even pressure on both sides, press it on down, and then press that tape into place. Just like that. Once again, if you built the baby blender before, this is going to be second nature for you, and I think it's actually a little bit easier. We're going to put our attention to the other side, do the exact same process. Take your time to try to not get any wrinkles in here if at all possible, because it'll show. Very thin bead of glue, just to give it some place to hold down to. We can even go back and put a little bit on our turtle decks too if we want. We don't want to rely on the tape to hold everything down. There we go. After the turtle deck, our next step is going to be to assemble the nose area. This has an optional FPV pod, so this area is going to be removable on the plane. It's going to slide out like a cartridge, so if you do want to fly FPV or put a camera rig on it just for some beautiful aerial video, you can actually swap the whole nose out without having to cut it off and get a nice clear view unobstructed by the nose. And during assembly, the only thing to take time with is just to make sure you get it nice and 90 degrees. We'll start with the bottom plate. Once again, the side cheek's going on top of the bottom plate. And then we'll build our top plate here. And with this being a B-fold, the side cheeks will go next to the bottom plate. It's always a good idea to go back, make sure you're perpendicular. Now that our bottom and our top of our nose are constructed, we're going to go ahead and take special mind on the plate that's going to go into the fuselage. Now to find the location of this, because everyone builds slightly different, especially if you're scratch building, this needs to actually go in reference to the bottom plate here, because we want it to seat up against it. So we're going to go ahead and temporarily insert a bottom plate, and the way we're going to do that, we're going to take this notch back to the very back here. Now, according to the plan, this is actually about a 30-second of a relief on the inside here. That's so the foam will, or the poster board will ride really hard up against here when it's inserted. So don't worry about it being perfectly flush. We want it to actually be a little bit off. Once we have that where we want to, we're going to go ahead and pinch this area here. And we're going to simply lay this plate down with the very front lining up perfectly. We're going to put our squeezing pressure here to keep that nose from moving. We're going to make sure we have this top plate where we want it, which is going to be flush with the very front of the bottom of the nose. Put a bead of glue, nothing too excessive, on both sides, and hold it until it dries. If you want, you can even come back with a scrap piece of foam, wipe off the excess. What this will do, this will keep this front portion of the nose from moving around, because everything else is fastened on and slides in. We want to keep this nice and firm. And friend, this is where all your hard work comes to play, because we get to join our wing with our fuselage now. Now you want to take special care. The whole reason we put this nose piece on was so it wouldn't buckle this area. This relief cut is actually just a touch smaller than the actual wing. That's so it's a nice tight fit as you push it on through, but you want to take care to go nice and smooth so you don't hurt the wing or the fuselage. To do this, we're going to simply take it to the very edge of the building board, support the bottom. We're going to take our wing and we're going to slowly thread it down. The trail edge of your wing is actually going to bite in to the back of your fuselage. And just a little rocking motion down is all you need. It'll slide right in for you. Just like that.
That sounds just terrible.
I think we made David cringe. This is Swedish torture too. So once you get this to where you want it, you can simply adjust it, and you have this nice center line right down your wing. You can measure the difference and just make sure it's even. This front nose piece, along with everything else, is giving it plenty of strength now, and it also gives us something to reference our tail onto now. Now that we have our wings on, it's very important that we get the center line of the wing lined up with the center line of the fuselage, but also get a nice big triangle and make sure that the leading edge is 90 degrees to your fuselage. Very important, because everything is going to be based off of this. Once you're happy with the fit, just to keep the outside looking good, I'm going to actually put a bead on the inside. Don't need a tremendous amount of hot glue to do this. First, take our little stick friend, smear it like so. Now for the moment, we're going to go ahead and put our fuselage to the side. Keep in mind that this nose is very fragile until you get the poster board around it, so just lay it somewhere flat. Our next step is going to be to put our attention towards the very front of the nose. Like, once again, this is a removable nose. It will slide in and out. It makes it very nice for also getting into your airplane as well. Included in our speed build kit is a piece of heavy duty poster board just like this. This is roughly what you're going to have. There's also a pattern on the plans. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take the very top surface of our nose, and we're going to lay this down, and if you see, we're going to split the difference so there's an equal amount of excess on both sides. Now, this is measured right and you build right. This will be roughly about a 32nd of an inch bigger on both sides, almost a millimeter bigger on both sides. You want that to be the case so it looks like a nice smooth cut. Once you're happy with that, you can simply take a pencil and draw a reference line right down the side here. That'll give you an area that you can work on. I also like to leave roughly about a 1/16 of an inch extra on the very back, so this area here overlaps the seam and kind of makes it look seamless. Once you're happy with the area you are, take your hot glue, a nice generous amount on the very top. Now you only have one crack at this. Take the very top edge at an angle, get it lined up where you want, and then push it down onto your reference line. If you try to do it flat, what'll happen is it won't be right, and then you won't be able to get it off. This portion is now firmly glued. And without creasing it, we're going to simply bend this back to a nice open loop and put a nice healthy bead of glue as consistent as possible all the way to the tip on both sides. Then with a smooth motion, we're going to go ahead, pinch this, put our hand down here, and we're going to simply roll this together. Then use your two fingers here to press that against it and make sure that it's staying parallel to the edge of the paper. If it's not, you do have a little bit of time to make some adjustments, and none of this will be seen because it's on the inside of the fuselage. At this point, we're going to bring back our fuselage, and we're going to take the very top of the nose, and we're going to simply put this in and check out our fit. Now, if you did this right, you should have a nice friction fit right along the top of the nose, and you're going to see that paper lights right along the top. That's exactly how we want it. Now, if it's raised up and it's hitting this bottom plate, say this was off just a little bit, simply just trim your top of your nose to let everything sit down. This is only for alignment. Gives a little bit of strength, but you can trim it back to make it fit. Just make sure you're happy with the fit before you go any further. Now, if you look here, we have two laser cut reference holes on both sides. Just like the FT Flyer, we're not going to try to puncture from one end to the other. We're simply going to go in one end with a twisted motion and switch around to the other end. Make sure that your poster board is pushed nice and firmly down. Once you have those two, you can then go through all the way like this. Now leave this in there because we're going to actually be pulling against the nose to get our bottom plate on. With your plane hanging off the back of your building board, you're going to find that's a nice way to work on it, just like this. We're going to go ahead and insert the bottom portion of our nose cartridge in the very bottom. Now with your wing on, it may be a little tighter than it used to be. If that's the case, that's just fine. Take your razor blade and just kind of crease the very bottom of this down until you have just enough friction for it to go in and out, but not where it's sloppy. Just like that. Once again, we're pushing this cartridge back to be level with our battery tray. Now, with holding the fuselage in place, go go ahead and start creasing the paper around to the very back end, and then simply pinch it to finish off your curve. Like that. Now, because we're going to want to pull against this, it's kind of hard to do that and glue at the same time. What I like to do, simply take about 2 inches of tape, fold over the very end on it, and then place that on the inside of your poster board. That'll work as a very nice pull tab for installation on your nose. With the bottom of your nose slid in all the way like it's supposed to be, once again paying attention to this very front, it should be very flush with your battery tray. Just put a little tiny dab of glue on the innermost corners to allow the paper to adhere to it. Don't go too excessive. Now, go ahead and pull our paper back. Just let that tack in there. All this is going to do is just give us a reference line on where we need to be. Once that's down, we'll carefully remove the top nose. We don't have our little pull off here. With a simple push, we'll slide the bottom of our plate out. Now we're going to repeat the same process as we did on the front of the nose. We're simply going to open up our paper, and we're going to put a simple bead of glue right down our channel here to the very tip. And then with a nice pressure, rock up against it. It's a nice thing to just kind of pull away from itself too. It's a good time to take some extreme packing tape. That way when you're pulling out on the poster board, it's not going to rip your poster board. It's actually going to pull on the proper area. And what I actually like to do is just leave this area to pull flush, like that. And continue it around all the way up. So now when you pull on it, you're physically pulling on the bottom plate, not just on your poster board. Our next step is to give it a test fit. There we go. Looks great. Before we set this down, we're going to do the same thing that we did on the very bottom of the plate. We're going to take about 2 inches of tape, fold over the edge, give ourselves a non-sticky little tab, and put it right on here and let that stick up ever so much. That way, rather than damaging our poster board, we can simply pull on the tape and lift this up. At this point, we can take our barbecue skewer, cut it to the length we want. I like to have it sticking out about 1/8 of an inch. Simply insert it right into your fuselage. Your nose is now done. Now before we put the nacelles and start getting our engine pods on it, it's a lot easier to handle the plane at this moment. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to install our aileron servos and also all of our control horns on and get our linkages started. This way what will happen is when we get our nacelles on, we don't have to try to fight through the little holes to get all of our wires ran. Now just like all of our speed build kits, it comes with these included control horns. Now if you're scratch building this and you don't want to go through the time of making these control horns but you like them, we sell them 20 packs for $5 and they're really good value. They work really well on all applications, not just our speed builds. But before we go ahead and glue this in, I like to go ahead and seat it down in place. Now if you're utilizing these control horns, the slots that are cut out here will match up perfectly, giving you your holes exactly where they need to be right over your hinge line. If you're using some other hardware, not a big deal. Just make sure that your holes go directly over your hinge line so you don't have different amounts of thrust. Once you've gone ahead and made that hole relief through that laser cut slot, simply put a bead of glue and seat it back in and let it dry. Do this on all your control surfaces. Now the only control horn that is different is the rudder, and it's because the rudder is so small on this back, we couldn't just simply keep it with the full length control horn. The space we're going to want to cut will be just behind this notch right here. If you want to sand it in a corner, that's fine too. Don't worry, there's plenty of strength, you'll be just fine. Just do the same process, seat it down in, fill the cavity with a little drop of glue, insert it on in. Our next step is to install the servos. It's much easier to install the servos and work without these big nacelles being in here, but before we do so, we're going to go ahead and remove our nose. on the plane. That'll give us access into here. And this would also be a good time, if you haven't done so already, to cut that excess tape out. This is where all your wires are going to go through. Now, as you can see on the Speedboat kit, all of our corners are radiused. That's just for a little added strength. Keep the crinkles from going. You don't have to make radiuses exactly how you see them. They can be boxes, they can be circles. Just keep the size in general, but you don't have to stress over little details like that. Now, a very easy way to run your servos in any kind of wing that where your servo is located out on the wing panel is simply take a nice thin piece of wire. It doesn't have to be thick at all. And what I like to do is actually simply guide this in and use the hook part sticking up. When you guide that in, you can physically just run it on out to where you want to grab it. Once you're happy with where it is, you can just simply take the servo that you want to lace in there, snake it past and let it hook itself, and then pull it on through. Simply going to push this bar servo right down and seat it flat. Now if we did everything right, our servo end should be waiting for us, ready for the Y harness. We'll go ahead and repeat this process on the other side as well. We're going to go ahead and put a little drop of glue underneath each side of the servo once we're happy with this placement, and squeeze it on down. The holes are just slightly smaller than the 9-gram servo, that way it kind of has a friction fit as well. To get the proper throws, I go all the way to the furthest out control horn hole and take that to my linkage stopper. Linkage stoppers are great, especially on the swappable series, because you can center everything up and then you can go from one plane to another without having to stress. Alright, we're going to lock down the last of our push rods. And it's much easier to go ahead and put this together now before you have all the other electronics hanging around you. Of course, it also benefits you to center everything up as well. We'll go back through before we fly it, make sure everything's centered up with zero trim. And you don't need a tremendous amount of throw from the elevator or the rudder. The ailerons is the only one that really matters, and you have plenty of throw from those. This is not a 3D aerobatic plane, it's a cruising plane. Flies pattern, flies smooth. So our control horns are out. All of our control surfaces go into the outermost hole of your control horn, and all of our servo arms are moved all the way the farthest out they can go, just so they can penetrate through the foam, and just so you can get maximum throw on your ailerons. We're going to go ahead and flip this over, and at this point, we're going to go ahead and install our Y harness. But if you don't want to lose the servo, since we're going to have quite a few wires coming through here, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and tape your servos up and out of the way, just to keep everything clear. And also, if you do this in a pair, it makes it much easier to find things in the future. So those are our aileron servos. Our next step after the servos is to go ahead and start working on our power pod area. To do this, we're going to want to send 2 signal wires looped into one, unless you're doing differential thrust, but we'll cover that in another episode. We're simply going to take our little trusty wire, we're going to go from the wings now towards the center section of the fuselage. And what I like to do is anytime that you have extensions that are going to be internal in the wing, tape them together. That way you don't have to ever worry about them coming apart inside the wing and then having to re-snake everything. Go ahead and pull that on through. And this will dangle down and make connection with our power pod. We'll repeat the same process on the other side. There we go. The reason why we're feeding all the small wires first is because when we get to the power wire, the wire that powers our speed controls, that's going to be the hardest to get through. So it's much easier to navigate this area with the smaller wires first and then let the big wire take up the rest of the space. One easy way to fish wires, especially when you have internal wing servos and other components that need to go through a long, narrow surface, is just simply take something like this 1mm wire, put a simple hook in it, and then you can navigate it through the holes, whether it be from the wingtips going in, or whether it be going from the center of the body going out to an access hole like on the cruiser with its nacelles. You can then take it out through the hole, snag the servo wire, and then pull it on through, or vice versa if you're going from the inside of the fuselage to the outer portion of the wing. Now this is one special component you will have to make for your FT Cruiser. It's going to be the wire harness that distributes the power from the battery to the 2 engine nacelles into the speed controls. Now if you've never built something like this before, we do have a link here showing you how to do it step by step, along with all the other optional accessories for the FT Cruiser. So you can go to that now if you need to make it. At this point, we're going to go ahead and put our plane aside, and we're going to build our engine nacelles. Now this is a B-style fold, which means the side cheeks will go next to the top plate. also has another little unique feature to it. Once again, fold it over 180 degrees. You can remove this guy right now. Do this on both pieces. When these fold together in the B-style fold, what you're going to have is these flanges sticking out through the back. Like so. So obviously you can't put it flat on the table, but what you can do is go to the edge of a workbench and then hold it off the edge of the workbench. Nice bead of glue. I always like to stop and start just shy of the edge. We're going to take it to the edge, fold it up into its B-style configuration, and hold it there till it glues. Halfway through, it's also very easy to flip it around and make sure that the other side is where you want it to. You want nice, crisp, sharp, square edges. And we'll repeat that on the other side. Once this is done and you're happy with the results, do the same process with the second one and we're ready for our next step. Now that our nacelles are built, we're going to go ahead and simply apply glue to our PowerPod spacers. Now we don't need to put, normally like on the FT3D and the Baby Blender, we put dowels in here. But because we have the landing gear going through here through barbecue skewers, and this meets the side cheeks of the PowerPod, we don't need dowels in here. This is simply to give it the proper thrust angle. Our nacelles are now done, and the next process is to fit them on there. Now you can see that there's 4 dowels here and 4 tabs cut in here. That is to keep your nacelles from going off on a goofy angle. So we're going to go ahead and take our electronics here, and we want to always do a test fit because we want to make sure everything's fitting good and that we're happy with it before we commit with the glue. And when I say that, we want the very back of the trailing edge just about kiss the back of the nacelle. If you have to bend a little bit, not a big deal, but you don't want a huge gap there if you can help it. So that looks really, really good. Now as you can see, the glue line is going to go just to the other side of that spacer and then just behind that notch. That's where you're going to want to put your glue. The easiest way to do this is take off your nacelle and physically put it on your wing itself. Put a little tiny bead on the very back there. I'm going to hold this at the leading edge, and I'm going to hold it at the trailing edge, and keep everything down nice and secure. Once you're happy with the first one, we'll repeat the same process on the other side. Now would be a really great time to go back and reinforce the bottom of your wing, and also each side of your nacelles with some glue. This is going to have a tremendous amount of pull. It's not a bad idea to make sure it's adequately secure. Simply use some of your tear-off foam, put a bead down, and smear it in. Now that our nacelles are on, our next step is we're going to install our PowerPod and start working on getting our electronics hooked up. Now the PowerPods are actually going to be held together by the landing gear, but the landing gear is removable, and when you don't have the landing gear, and you just replace where the landing gear goes through with barbecue skewers. And we're going to let this protrude roughly about a ½ inch, a little bit wider because rubber bands need to go around it. And then the back end is the same thing. If you want to keep a little bit of extra durability, one thing you can do before adding this on is physically just take a simple piece of tape, extreme packing tape or whatever, and line the inside of these holes here. Reason being is because your landing gear is going to be coming and getting knocked, it will make those holes looser, and eventually you're going to go back and have to reinforce it. So we'll just go ahead and lay down a little piece of tape on each one of those holes to give it a little bit more beefiness. And we'll repeat the same process on the other side. Now with the nacelles and everything together, we haven't forgotten our elevator. We're going to want to go back and adjust this, but with this all laying nice and flat, it's much easier to go back and line this up and take your time. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set on the wing, make sure that the elevator is nice and parallel to the wing, and that it should stay pretty true here, just because the rudder actually keys right through it. So my main concern is just making sure that it's parallel. And you just simply do that by sighting it down, and if you have to do a little bit of movement, you just simply kind of tilt it a little bit. The paper will crush, the foam will crush, and then when the hot glue goes in, it'll lock everything down just beautifully. And I'm happy with that right now. So I'll simply go ahead and put a bead of glue. Once again, go into my foam scrap. and driving it in. And then we'll get this guy here. That guy there. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to make our connections before putting our landing gear on with all of our servos. Now, as we said before, these are our ailerons. Our throttle's connected here, and of course is our battery is right here. The next thing we need to do is we do need to run our servos for our elevator and our rudder all the way forward. That's why we have these little servo extensions. Our next step is we're going to make our connections with our servos and our speed controls right into our tactic receiver right here. And we're going to go ahead and route this back. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now that we have this all down, we want to make an area for the battery, and this is our battery tray here normally. Now if we're flying FPV later, the battery actually goes back in this area right here. But for now we're going to put it up in the front, and I want to reinforce this area with a little bit of tape. That way when you put your Velcro down, you don't have to worry about ripping off your paper every time you rip it up. Now we go to the fuzzy on the fuselage, and that little hole that you see there is actually a hole that's cut in case you're carrying a GoPro with the FPV pod. So I'm going to actually just put this right behind that little hole right there, so we don't have to try to compete with it. And this will fit a 2200 battery just right. Now this is on. Do keep in mind with Tactic and Futaba transmitters, the throttle does need to be reversed to operate properly. So make sure that you have your receiver bound, your throttle working properly before you fire this all up. You don't want it going full throttle on you suddenly. We're going to go ahead and make our connections and center up all our servos and our control surfaces and lock them in. We are on the home stretch, friends. We have our servo linkages locked down. We have everything neutralized. Once again, it's better not to use sub trims. You want to go ahead and lock down your linkage stoppers where it goes. Keep in mind with the linkage stoppers by the back of the fuselage, you may need to cut your push rod just a little bit short so there's no binding by the foam there. You can also choose to reverse your linkage stoppers and put them back by your control horns. It's totally your preference. Our next step while the plane's upside down will be take a little bit of scrap from our barbecue skewers we have left over. And of course, put our tail skid just like we've done on all of our previous airplanes. This plane has no problem getting off the ground very quickly, and if you choose to go with differential thrust, you can taxi around incredibly just by using your motors. Alright friends, we're now getting ready to build our landing gear, and unlike previous builds, we have two halves of a landing gear to build because these actually go off the nacelles, and they have a lot of cool features, but it's basically built out of 4 bends. This is a 16-inch rod wire that we have here, and we're going to convert this by making 3 bends into our landing gear. The first bend you're going to want to make is going to be at 2 3/4, or for you metric guys out there, at 7 centimeters. That's going to be 90 degrees. The second bend you're going to want to make is going to be 6 3/4 inches, or basically 17.5 centimeters. That'll be perpendicular 90 degrees to your first bend. And the very last bend you're going to want to do is going to be measured from the very tip, and that's going to be 1 3/4 inches, or 4 centimeters. And that'll be 90 degrees going parallel with your very first bend. Now the nice thing about this is you can take your time, and each bend just make sure you get it perpendicular in the way you want it. Once you get this done, you're going to want to make an exact mirror image of this landing gear. There we go. Now if they're a little off, don't panic because they're actually going to be separated by about 18 inches. Now before we install this, we're going to want to keep the landing gear from kicking out. And to do this, there's going to be 2 holes that are laser cut or marked on your airplane plans that you're going to want to go ahead and fit a dowel rod through. Simply make a puncture roughly about 1/2 inch. Keep in mind if you go too deep, you go through the other side of the wing. And that's not something you want. Once you got that down, cut about 1 inch off of the very top. Put a drop of glue right down in the hole, and just like we do on our power pods, seat it on down and in. We're going to go ahead and slide our landing gears through the back of the power pod, seat it down, and there should be nice friction fit here. Now the next step we're going to want to do is to simply slide this forward. Now where this is, I want these landing gears to actually angle a little bit forward. So right above this here, this area, simply take your pliers and put a really slight bend, just angling them forward. That way when you have an impact, it's going to rest against the back of this barbecue skewer here, but it's going to move the CG forward, so it makes the plane very difficult to tip over. Take one of the supplied rubber bands, go around the landing gear once, over to the other side, take it back home. Just going nowhere. Very, very strong. Repeat the same process with the other side. Now if you bought our speed build kit, you're going to get a little foam wheel kit that looks like this. Now it's the same process as a power pod build that you've seen when you built your power pods. Now if you haven't built one of these before, just simply go there and look at it. The only difference is we included this extra little ring to give it a little bit of a 3D depth and a wired footprint. So go ahead and construct your wheels and we're ready to put them on. Easiest way to put the wheels on, grab a hot glue, swirl it around. These are roughly 2 3/4 inch wheels. You can always come back with a Dremel and cut that to size. We left it a little bit long in case you choose to use different wheels. Friends, we're almost finished. Our next step is to install the removable nose back into the fuselage. And while we're at it, we're going to want to put our battery in because next step is to do our weight and balance. Now for the balance point, because the laser actually etches on the inside of the wing, I couldn't put a CG mark. But what I did do was put 2 laser cut holes on both sides of the fuselage here and on the other side. Now this serves 2 purposes. For your FPV pod, you don't want to take any chances of that sliding out. So I gave people the option. It actually extends further back, so when they put the barbecue skewer through, it keys that FPV pod in, keeping your load secure. Now, with this, you don't need to worry about that because the cantilever's under the wing, the air pressure is going to keep it back. But this will be the area that you're going to want to check for balance, and you should have just a slight nose down touch, just like that. I highly recommend that you fly this slightly nose heavy right at the balance point. If you try to fly it tail heavy, it will fly, but it gives you some very weird pitch issues that you don't want to have to deal with. So keep in mind when you go from FPV to standard flight or vice versa, make sure your CG is checked and accounted for because you're going to be moving your battery around to counteract that. Our last step is to take our throw gauge and to make sure that our throws are proper on both aileron, elevator, rudder. Friends, she is now officially complete. Our balance is taken care of, our throws are taken care of, and we're ready to go test fly it. But first I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to support Flight Test through your purchase of speed build kits. Also for your wonderful feedback in regards to this plane. This plane would not have existed without your requests and your feedback with you guys saying we want a twin swappable. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. It was probably one of the most pleasurable planes to build and to fly. And speaking of flying, we're going to go ahead and do that right now. But as you can see, this plane is bare bones. The ones in the video were decorated like crazy. Look for our videos of how to install decals, and also there's great options of taking water bottles and cutting them up to make beautiful canopies for this, along with an optional kit for the FPV and also some split flaps. So there's going to be a lot of different options coming out for this airplane because it's a very versatile platform, and we look forward to showing that to you actually with the links below. So I'm going to go out and test fly this. Once again, thank you for watching.